بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. All praises due to Allah, and may His peace and blessings be upon His final Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Inshallah, tonight we will begin discussing the book of Imam Al-Muzani, which is titled Sharh Sunnah. Sharh Sunnah. Before we start with the text of this book, we'll give a short biography of this Imam. His name is Ismail ibn Yahya ibn Ismail ibn Amr ibn Muslim, and he comes from the tribe of Muzani, which is a famous Arab tribe, and he's from Egypt. He is from Egypt. His kunya is Abu Ibrahim, and he's famously known as one of the closest and greatest students of Imam Al-Shafi'i, Muhammad ibn Idris Al-Shafi'i rahimahullah, the great Imam of Islam. Imam Al-Muzani was born in the year 175 after the hijrah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there is not much mentioned in his biography regarding his early life, but what appears to be the case is that he came from a family that was eager and encouraging in seeking knowledge, because not only was he a student of Imam Al-Shafi'i, his sister, rahimahullah, also attended the lessons and the sittings of Imam Al-Shafi'i. And his nephew, who we mentioned is one of his students, is also a great Imam. His sister's son is Imam Al-Tahawi, who is a great Hanafi scholar. So he was born in the year 175. So this is the era just after the Atba' al-Tabi'een, the third generation of those first three generations in which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam praised as being the greatest of generations. And even in this era, there was a flourishment in Islamic knowledge. And there were many, many great scholars during this time. And in many cities across the Muslim empire, there was always scholars who appeared and flourished in those cities. That year he was born, 175, was a year in which one of the great scholars of Egypt died, Al-Layth ibn Sa'd. And Al-Layth ibn Sa'd was a contemporary of Imam Malik. Imam Malik, Anas ibn Malik, or Malik ibn Anas, one of the great scholars of Islam, one of the Imams of the four madhabs. So Al-Layth ibn Sa'd was one of his contemporaries. In fact, Imam Al-Shafi'i said about him that Al-Layth was more knowledgeable than Imam Malik, but his students didn't preserve his knowledge, meaning they were not effective in transmitting that knowledge until it continued. So in that time there were many imams and there were many madhabs. Each imam has his own madhab. But after the imams, it is upon the students to go out and teach and promote it. However, Al-Layth ibn Sa'd, his students did not promote his knowledge like the students of Imam Malik. So that was the year in which Al-Layth died, Imam Al-Muzani was born. And there were many great scholars during this time. As we said, Malik ibn Anas, and he was in Al-Madinah, rahimahullah, and he died in the year 179, so 4 years after Imam Al-Muzani was born. Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, Warsh al-Muqri, obviously his teacher, Imam Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, Ishaq ibn Rahuya, Ibn Abi Shayba, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, one of the great scholars of Islam, one of the 4 Imams from the madhabs. And it continues, the list continues. Imam al-Bukhari, Imam Muslim, Imam Abu Dawood, Ibn Majah, Imam al-Tirmidhi, Imam al-Nasa'i. So these great scholars of hadith also lived during this lifetime. Imam Abu Zur'a al-Razi and Abu Hatim al-Razi. All of these great Imams lived during this time period. So it was a time period in which Islamic knowledge flourished and spread. And it was common for the scholars to travel. They would travel from city to city, city to city, city to city, seeking knowledge. This was the norm. However, some scholars did not do this. And from them was Imam Al-Muzani. Imam Al-Muzani did not have a travel in which he traveled to seek knowledge. He stayed in Egypt and stuck close to his teacher, Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i, rahimahumullah. So that is his closest and most famous teacher, Imam al-Shafi'i. And Imam al-Shafi'i said about him that Al-Muzani is the champion of my madhab. Al-Muzani is the champion of my madhab. And he authored books on the madhab of Imam al-Shafi'i. And he was the one who played a major role in spreading the madhab of Imam al-Shafi'i after the Imam passed away. Another one of his teachers, Ali ibn Ma'bad al-Basri, who was a Hanafi scholar and a student of Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani. And Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani was the direct student of Abu Hanifa. So his student, Ali ibn Ma'bad, was a teacher of Imam Al-Muzani. And the third sheikh or teacher of Imam Al-Muzani that we will mention is Nu'aym ibn Hammad al-Khuza'i. And Nu'aym ibn Hammad, he learned from many scholars. Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, Sufyan ibn al-Uyayna, Al-Walid ibn Muslim, and many others. And he was one who traveled from city to city and city to city. He was originally from Khorasan, which is, in our modern day times, is northern Afghanistan. And then he traveled from there to Al-Hijaz, Mecca and Medina, Iraq, Al-Sham, Yemen, and finally he traveled to Egypt. He traveled to Egypt, and that is where Imam Al-Muzani learnt from him, or took knowledge from him. And this scholar, Nu'aym ibn Hammad, he was one of the great scholars in defending the Sunnah and the belief of the Salaf. And he was one of the early ones to start refuting the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila. And he has many great quotes which Ahl Sunnah till our time today use to show what is the true belief of Ahl Sunnah in establishing their creed. And also he was one of the scholars who was trialed during the Mihna. The Mihna, as we have previously mentioned, was the Inquisition the Inquisition during almost a 30-year period that covered the leadership of three Khulafa, Al-Ma'mun, Al-Mu'tasim, and Al-Wathiq. And this Inquisition was to force the people to say that the Quran is created. That the Quran is created. And we'll discuss this mihna, this Inquisition, during our explanation of the text when we come to the topic of the Quran and our belief in the Quran. But briefly, it was a time where the Mu'tazila and the Jahmiyyah gained access to the Khulafa and convinced them that the Quran is created. The Quran is created, and then they enforced it upon the people, trying to make the Imams say it. Some of them gave in, some of them resisted, and eventually gave in, and others remained firm. They remained firm, and some of them were punished, some of them were killed, some of them were imprisoned and died in prison. And from those who was imprisoned was Nu'aym ibn Hammad. He was transported from Egypt to Baghdad, because Baghdad was the capital of the Muslim Caliphate during this time. He was transported from Egypt all the way to Baghdad so that they could force him to say that the Quran is created, but he resisted and he died in prison. He died not backing in, not backing down, resisting their deviancy and remaining firm. And Nu'aym ibn Hammad wasn't only a teacher of Imam Al-Muzani, he was also a teacher of Imam Al-Bukhari. Imam Al-Bukhari, rahimahullah. So these are three of the teachers of Imam Al-Muzani, and in his biography in the books of Islamic history, there are not many teachers mentioned for him. And the reason for that would be that he did not travel from city to city seeking knowledge, but rather he remained in his city, in Cairo, in Egypt, and he stuck close to Imam Al-Shafi'i. He stuck close to Imam Al-Shafi'i and took from him and followed his way. And he even said about himself that I am only but from the qualities of Imam Al-Shafi'i. However, he did have many students. As we said, he was one who had a main role in promoting and passing on the madhab of Imam Al-Shafi'i. So from his students, we have Abu al-Qasim, Uthman ibn Bashar, and Abu Yahya As-Saji. These were his two main students. These were his two main students and two closest students. But he had other students as well. From them, as we mentioned earlier, was his nephew, the son of his sister, his nephew Abu Ja'far Muhammad ibn Ahmad al-Tahawi, rahimahullah. And Imam al-Tahawi said that the first person I wrote down hadith from was Al-Muzani. Imam al-Tahawi was a scholar of hadith and other sciences in Islam. He has a very famous book on Aqidah, which is known as Aqidah al-Tahawiyya, and he has books in Hanafi fiqh, and he has books in hadith. Books in hadith the first person he started to take hadith from was his uncle, Imam Al-Muzani. Imam Al-Muzani. Also from Imam Al-Muzani's students was a scholar who the scholars of his time admitted to his scholarship. In fact, they nicknamed him Imam Al-A'imma, the Imam of all Imams. And this Imam is Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Ishaq ibn Khuzaymah. And he was a great scholar of the Sunnah and a defender of the belief of Ahl Sunnah and refuting those who deviated away from it. He also narrated hadith to one of the great hadith scholars, Abdul Rahman Al-Razi. Abdul Rahman Al-Razi, who was the son of another hadith scholar, Abu Hatim Al-Razi. And another of his students was also a great scholar who is titled Imam Al-Mufassirin, the Imam of the scholars of Tafsir. And that is Muhammad ibn Jarir al-Tabari. Muhammad ibn Jarir al-Tabari, who authored a great tafsir and is considered the earliest and most complete tafsir that we have today. And in this tafsir, he focused on narrating what the Salaf said. What the Salaf said regarding the verses of the Quran. Each verse or each group of verses, he would give tafsir, and then he will mention who said this from the Salaf. Who said this from the Salaf. So this is just a handful of his students. And we can see that his students were also great Imams. He was an Imam, he took from great Imams, and he also developed and played a role in raising up scholars after him. Imam Al-Muzani was praised by the scholars in his lifetime. And they praised not only his knowledge and his teaching, but also his worship. Also his worship. He was a great worshipper of Allah. Very devoted in worshipping Allah. And that is the fruit of knowledge. That is the fruit of knowledge. One seeks knowledge to get closer to Allah so they can worship Allah upon knowledge. Upon knowledge. So, one of the scholars from Mecca, Amr ibn Uthman, he said, I have not seen anyone from amongst the worshippers, despite the many that I have met in Mecca, whether they are residents or those coming for Hajj, nor from those who I have met in Asham or any of the military outposts that are more diligent in striving than Imam Al-Muzani. So this Imam from Mecca, who witnessed many people come to Mecca for Hajj and Umrah, and who traveled and said he has not seen anyone more devoted in worship than Imam Al-Muzani. And he said, I have not seen anyone who showed greater reverence for knowledge and its people than he did. He was amongst the strictest of people upon himself in matters of self-restraint, yet he was the most lenient with others in that regard. And he used to say, I am a product of Imam al-Shafi'i's character. So Imam al-Muzani strived in his worship. He also restrained himself from the beautification of this world, but he was lenient with others regarding that. So he was strict on himself, but not on others. And he said all of this is just a product from the characteristics of Imam Al-Shafi'i. We said he was a great scholar in passing on the madhab of Imam Al-Shafi'i, and that is because he stuck close to him and he followed his advice. What did Imam Al-Shafi'i advise him? He said to him, would you like to learn something in which that if you are correct, you are rewarded, but if you are mistaken, you have not committed the sin? He said to him, what is it? Imam Al-Shafi'i replied, fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence. So Imam Al-Muzani said, I stuck close to him and learned fiqh from him and studied under him. So Imam Al-Shafi'i advised him to stick to this knowledge. Why? Because of the innovations in creed that was spreading. He was advising him not to go out and debate, but to focus on learning. Focus on learning. However, Imam Al-Muzani was strong in speech and strong in debating. Even though he avoided it as much as he could, he said, or Imam Al-Shafi'i said about him, that if you were to debate the devil, you would silence him. Because he was so eloquent in speech and could prove his point very easily. Imam Al-Dhahabi said about him that he is the great Imam, the distinguished scholar, the jurist of the Ummah, and the leading figure among the ascetics. The ascetics are those who avoid worldly aspects, worldly desires. So, as we said, he was a great scholar, a great worshipper of Allah, and he was praised by those around him because they witnessed, they saw what he did and what he accomplished. From his worship is that, from his worship is that he used to wash the dead, seeking to get closer to Allah, seeking to soften his heart. He said, I took it upon myself to wash the dead so that my heart would soften, and it became a ritual for me. Because washing the dead is obviously going to remind the washer of death, and not to become too attached to the dunya. Because he sees it is between his hands that death is close. So he took it upon himself to wash the dead. To wash the dead. In fact, he is the one who washed Imam Al-Shafi'i rahimahullah when he died. As for his aqidah, his creed, he was upon the aqidah of Ahl Sunnah, the aqidah of the Salaf. And the book that we are going to study, inshaAllah, is a testament to this. He stated towards the end of the book, these are the statements, the proclamations and actions upon which the early Salaf from the Imams of guidance agreed upon. So he made it clear that what he has stated in this book is agreed upon by the Salaf, by the early scholars. But not only is it his book that shows us his firmness upon the way of the Salaf, he has other words and statements which the scholars of Ahl Sunnah have narrated and transmitted, affirming the belief of the Salaf in these issues. He authored different books, and his books contributed to the vast Islamic library that we have today. From his most famous books is Al-Jama' Al-Saghir, Al-Mukhtasar Al-Kabir, and also his most famous book, Mukhtasar Al-Mukhtasar, which is in the fiqh of the Shafi'i madhab. In fact, he put a lot of effort in this book. It took him 20 years to complete. It took him 20 years to complete. So it is a great book, and that book spread. That book spread. It was even mentioned, yani, in the history books, that when a woman is getting married, they would put that book for her part of her wedding ceremony when she's going back to her home. When she's going to her home, that is part of the things to prepare her for marriage, to have this book. It was a very important book, and as we said, he played a great role in passing on the madhab of Imam Al-Shafi'i. And he said about this book, had Imam Al-Shafi'i lived till I completed this book, he would have heard it from me. He would have heard it from me. Imam Al-Muzani lived a long life. He was born, as we said, in the year 175 and died in the year 264. So he lived for approximately 88 or 89 years. And he was buried in Al-Qarafa Cemetery, which is in Cairo. And it was close to where his Shaykh, Imam Al-Shafi'i, was buried. So this is a very brief biography of this great Imam. Now I want to focus on his madhab. As we stated, he is a Shafi'i scholar, one of the closest students to Imam Al-Shafi'i. And we have an issue today. There are people who attribute themselves to Imam Al-Shafi'i, but in fiqh only. Only in fiqh. They say, I am Shafi'i in fiqh. And then they attribute themselves to other things in Aqidah. Ash'ari or whatever it may be. And this is problematic. Why is that? Because is there something wrong with the Aqidah of Imam Al-Shafi'i? He himself was a great scholar of the Sunnah. And he lived in the time of other great scholars of the Sunnah. He learnt from Imam Malik, and he taught Imam Ahmad. And Imam Ahmad is titled the Imam of Ahl Sunnah. And Al-Shafi'i said about him that I benefited more from him than he benefited from me. So obviously Imam Al-Shafi'i, his Aqidah is firm upon the Aqidah of the Salaf, the creed of the Salaf. And inshallah we will take some of his statements when we get to those matters in the book and what he believed. So why is it today that we have people who do not want to attribute themselves to Imam Al-Shafi'i in his Aqidah? Why is it that they prefer someone else? someone who came much later on, when he himself was upon the correct creed and his students were. And we'll take some examples of the Shafi'i Imams who promoted and taught the correct Aqidah. Starting from the students, the direct students of Imam Al-Shafi'i. So what is the role that the Shafi'i scholars had in promoting and defending the creed of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah? The first scholar that we will mention is Al-Humaydi, Abu Bakr Abdullah ibn Zubayr Al-Humaydi. He was from one of the earliest and closest students of Imam Al-Shafi'i. And he remained close to him until Imam Al-Shafi'i died. Al-Humaydi, rahimahullah, he wrote or authored a book clarifying and making clear what the Aqidah of Ahl Sunnah is. And this book is called Usul al-Sunnah, the foundation of the Sunnah. And this book is still available till today. And he was a great scholar of Hadith and the Sunnah. Al-Hakim said about him, he said, Al-Humaydi is the mufti of the people of Mecca. So he's like a Shafi'i. Shafi'i is originally from Mecca. Or he went to Mecca and he followed him to Egypt. So he's the mufti of the people of Mecca and their hadith scholar. And to them, in the Sunnah, he is like Imam Ahmad to the people in Iraq. So that shows the great status that this Imam had. So his book is showing and clarifying what the Aqidah of Ahl Sunnah is. Another student of Imam Al-Shafi'i who defended and upheld the Aqidah of the Salaf was Al-Buwayti, Abu Yaqub Yusuf ibn Yahya Al-Buwayti. He was another close student of Imam Al-Shafi'i. And Imam Al-Shafi'i praised him and said, there is no one more deserving of my company than Yusuf ibn Yahya. And no one from my companions, meaning his students, is more knowledgeable than him. Al-Buwayti was tested during the Mihnah. The Inquisition, forcing people to say that the Quran is created. One of the judges from Egypt informed one of the leaders about this Imam to try and make him say that the Quran is created. He refused. So they took him from Egypt all the way to Baghdad, like Nu'aym ibn Hammad. They were together. And they made him ride a mule from Egypt to Baghdad with his hands and neck bound together, using heavy iron chains. All of this was a form of punishment. It was a form of punishment, taking him from one city to another, chained up. Why? To force him to say that the Quran is created. To force him to say that the Quran is created. To make him agree with them. However, he remained patient. He did not cave in. He did not give in to their request. So they threw him in jail, still chained up, to the extent that he said that there would be times that he could no longer feel the iron. I mean, he became numb. He would only realize again that he's chained up when he would touch it with his hand. But he remained like that. Why did he refuse to give in? He said that Allah Azza wa Jal created the creation with the word kun, be. When Allah creates, He says kun, and it is. He said, if the word kun is created, then it is as if the creation was created by another creation. So he refused. He refused. This was one of the reasons why he rejected. How can he be created from another creation? He is created by Allah, like every other creation. And he said, by Allah, I will die in this iron of mine, so that those who come after me will come to know that people had died for this cause while bound up. So he wanted to be an example, to show that this issue is not a light matter. It is to be taken seriously. It is to be taken seriously, and he sacrificed himself. He refused to give in. They kept him locked up, enchained, imprisoned, until he died. And he died resisting giving in to them. The next scholar, also a direct student of Imam Al-Shafi'i, is Al-Kinani, Abdul Aziz ibn Yahya Al-Kinani. He himself traveled from Mecca to Baghdad during the caliphate of Al-Ma'mun. Al-Ma'mun was the one who initiated the Inquisition, the Mihna, towards the end of his lifetime. And it continued after Al-Ma'mun to the caliphate of Al-Mu'tasim, and then after Al-Mu'tasim, Al-Wathiq. So during the caliphate of Al-Ma'mun, he debated one of the Jahmiyyah. Al-Kinani traveled to Baghdad to debate him, to prove he is wrong. Who did he debate? One of the leaders of the Jahmiyyah, Bishr al-Mardisi. And Al-Kinani, he wrote a book. He wrote a book telling what took place during this debate. He called the book Al-Hayda wal-I'tidhar fi al-Rad ala man qala bi khalq al-Quran. The evasion and the excuse, a refutation of those who claim that the Quran is created. So he took it upon himself to go out of his way to defend the creed of Ahl Sunnah. The next Shafi'i scholar that we will mention, he is not a direct student of Imam Al-Shafi'i. He learnt from the students of Imam Al-Shafi'i, and that is Ibn Surayj, Abu al-Abbas, Ahmed ibn Umar ibn Surayj. And he was very intelligent and very sharp. And they nicknamed him the Grey Falcon or the White Falcon because of his sharp intelligence and his fearlessness in defending the truth. He was also titled the second Shafi'i, Shafi'i number 2. He wrote a treatise defending the Sunnah, and this book has been passed on generation to generation, and Imam Ibn Al-Qayyim, who was generations after him, he included this book in his book, اجتماع الجيوش الإسلامية. So it is a book defending the creed of Ahl Sunnah. Another scholar who we referred to earlier, the student of Imam Al-Muzani, Imam Ibn Al-Khuzaymah, Muhammad ibn Ishaq ibn Khuzaymah. As we said, student of Imam Al-Muzani, and one of the greatest scholars of his time. They named him Imam Al-A'imma. And we mentioned him when we took the introduction into the Aqeedah of Ahl Sunnah regarding the Sunnah and how we understand it, and that there's no contradiction. He is the one who said that if anyone claims that there are two authentic hadiths that are contradictory, then bring them to me and I'll show you how to reconcile between them. Al-Muzani said about him that Ibn al-Khuzaymah, so his teacher Al-Muzani said, Ibn al-Khuzaymah is more knowledgeable in hadith than I am. So this is the teacher praising the student, showing that he is even more knowledgeable than he is. And he was very staunch in defending the Sunnah and the creed of the Salaf. And he used to refute them. And he would not back down. And sometimes he would use very harsh words. And he authored one of the great books in the Aqeedah of Ahl Sunnah, and he called it At-Tawheed. At-Tawheed. He strived in the path of defending the Sunnah and the creed of Ahl Sunnah. We'll stop there inshaAllah and we'll continue next week. Wallahu alam. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Wassalamu alaikum.